It is good to see each and every one of you this morning. I understand we're having some precipitation outside, but that's okay. We're in here. And my guess is that most of us are very familiar with the story of Thomas. You know, doubting Thomas. Thomas, the one disciple with stubbornness, refusing to believe until he saw with his own eyes and was able to touch the risen Christ. Silly Thomas. I mean, if only he had listened to the others, but no, he wasn't about to do that. He has to see for himself. I mean, after all, seeing is believing, and he's got some questions he might want answered. He has to be sure. Picking up where we left off in John's Gospel, chapter 20 earlier, we find these words beginning in verse 24. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came that we read about earlier. So the other disciples told him, "We've seen the risen Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." And Thomas responded, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." John then tells us that Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in that book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. I'd like for us this morning to maybe take a little closer look at Thomas. The first question that comes to my mind is this: is Thomas really all that different from any of the other disciples? I mean, let's think back to the Easter story that we looked at last Sunday. Mary went to the tomb, and it was empty. So she ran back and told Peter and John. Did they immediately believe her? No. They went to the tomb to see for themselves. And it wasn't until they go inside and see the cloth and the linens lying empty in the tomb that they believe. The question is, what do they believe? That Jesus is risen? No. We're told in verse 9 of John chapter 20 that they didn't understand the Scripture and that he must rise again. So Peter and John, they return home knowing only that the tomb is empty. Even Mary, when Jesus answers her directly, does not recognize him at first. And even after she does recognize him, she goes back and tells the disciples, but we're not given any indication that they do anything about it. In fact, the other Gospels tell us that they did not believe what Mary told them. Luke puts it this way, quote, "These words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them." And then we get to the passage for today. And what happens? The disciples are in a locked room. Jesus comes and stands among them. Do they immediately cry out in relief? No. And then Jesus says, "Peace be with you." Do they immediately proclaim His resurrection? No. Then after He said this, He showed them His hands and His side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Are these really faithful disciples of whom Thomas is the only one who's skeptical? No. You see, all of the disciples needed proof to believe. All of them see Jesus. All of them hear Jesus. And all of them see evidence of the bodily resurrection. But it is only after they see that proof that they rejoice. Of course, after they believe, after they tell Thomas, Thomas still wants proof for himself. I mean, sure, nobody believed Mary when she told them, but she's only one person. And not even a, quote, real disciple. But now Thomas has the word of 10 people. All of them disciples of Jesus. Why would he still doubt? Why? Well, let's think about Thomas for a moment. And when I say let's think about Thomas for a moment, what else do we know about him? Has he always been this kind of lackluster disciple? Well, to be honest, you're not going to find out much about Thomas in the Gospels. In fact, aside from his name appearing in the list of disciples, there are only 2 other instances where Thomas is identified by name, both in John's Gospel. One is when Jesus insists on going to Judea after he learns of the sickness and ultimately death of his good friend Lazarus. The disciples know that's not a smart move to go back to Judea. I mean, the last time Jesus had been there, the Jews tried to stone him. But this time Jesus is determined to go. And who is it that speaks up? It's Thomas. And Thomas says, well, let us also go that we may die with him in John chapter 11. This doesn't sound like the Thomas we know. It doesn't even sound like a doubting Thomas. It doesn't sound like a stubborn, hard-headed Thomas. You see, that statement sounds more like a Thomas of courage, a Thomas of conviction. The second time we find him in John's Gospel is in chapter 14. And in chapter 14 of John's Gospel, he sounds a lot more like the Thomas that we know, the questioning Thomas, the doubting Thomas. You see, Jesus is telling the disciples that he's going to prepare a place for them in his Father's house and that they already know the way. Who is it that speaks up? It's our good friend Thomas. Because Thomas says to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we possibly know the way? And Jesus responds to him by saying, I am the way and the truth and the life. If you know me, you will know my Father also. And from now on, you do know him because you've seen him. Thomas had been told by Jesus himself that by seeing Jesus, he has seen who? God. You're right. By seeing himself, Jesus, Thomas has seen God. So when the disciples tell him 3 days after the crucifixion that they have seen Jesus alive, is it any wonder that Thomas wants to see for himself? I mean, because he knows what seeing Jesus means. Seeing Jesus means seeing God. And here again, is where we see Thomas actually being faithful to Jesus. Because Jesus has told the disciples, beware that you're not led astray. For many will come in my name and say, I am he, and the time is near. Do not go after them. In other words, Thomas is not about to be led astray. He's going to test what he's hearing. He wants to test what he's being told. Now, if you haven't caught on by now, you need to understand that I think Thomas has so often gotten the short end of the stick in most Christian traditions. And the reason I say that is for this reason. Because I identify with Thomas. In fact, there are those times, and have been those times in my faith walk, that I am Thomas. I'm not necessarily one for blind faith. I'm a questioner, an asker. I'm a doubter from time to time. It's true that Jesus asks for faith, but he doesn't always and necessarily ever ask for blind faith. Jesus is willing for you and I to have a faith of open eyes. But then we come to that pesky part of our text this morning. It's located at the very end, where Jesus says, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Okay, so Jesus forgives Thomas for wanting to make sure, but isn't Jesus saying that those who really believe won't need that kind of proof? And the thing you and I have to remember is that Thomas did not just believe what he saw. Thomas also believed that which he didn't see. I mean, bear in mind, Thomas has seen someone come back from the dead before. Not that many weeks ago, we were at the home of Mary and Martha, when Jesus called for Lazarus to come out of the tomb, and Lazarus came out of the tomb. Okay. So, being alive after being dead doesn't necessarily equal being God. The key for Thomas is that he knows the implications of what he has seen. He believes that Jesus is not only alive, but that Jesus is also God. The other disciples rejoice in seeing Jesus alive, but Thomas is the only one who proclaims what? My Lord and my God. Thomas is both the one who sees and believes that Jesus has risen, but he's also the one who has not seen, but believes beyond seeing that Jesus is indeed Lord. Listen, half of us are like Thomas. We're afraid to believe. Half of every heart is a Thomas. Here's the thing. Doubt does not overtake us in an instant. But doubt is something that can creep onto us and into our lives slowly. One step at a time. You know, the very first thing I noticed when Jesus appeared to the disciples in the upper room following the resurrection, first thing I noticed is Thomas wasn't there. Thomas was absent. He was absent from the other disciples. I mean, who knows why he wasn't there? John doesn't tell us. I have no clue. But I think we all would have to agree that he may have been our ancestor of absenteeism. Okay? The writer of the book of Hebrews makes it very clear that we should not what? Forsake the assembling of ourselves together. In other words, the first step, the first incremental step toward doubt is to be absent from the people of God. It's short. The first incremental step toward doubt is skipping church. It's as simple as I know how to put it. The next step toward doubt is that there is some indication that Thomas may have been a little bit moody. Here's what I mean by that. Our beliefs are more attached to our moods than we might be willing to admit. Why? Because doubt is more emotion than it is intellectual exercise. You see, doubt is influenced by the way you and I feel about ourselves, how we feel about life. I mean, that's just a matter of the way it is. Frankly, some people turn to doubt. Why? Because it's a way for them to hide. And so long as we and I can live in the room of doubt, we feel as though we haven't really got to do a whole lot to contribute to anything. You know, how many times has somebody said something to you? You go, well, I doubt it. Why are you doubting it? You know, perhaps it's because we really don't want to have to deal with where we are or what the subject is. The disbelief and the doubting for Thomas was not something that was rooted in fact. It was something that was inside of Thomas. It had to do with his mood. Having said that, I have to be honest with you and simply tell you that there is a place in the Christian faith and in the Christian life for honest doubt. Why? Because doubt always precedes faith. Always. Before Gideon was able to be used by God, Gideon cried out, "If the Lord is with us, why has this befallen us?" Gideon's doubting. Or Job, who in his struggles cried out, "I cried out unto you and you did not answer." Jeremiah, you got to remember, he cursed the day he was born. And folks, never ever let us forget that Jesus on the cross cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" You see, nobody really possesses their faith until he or she has fought for it. I suppose that was a period in my life in which my faith grew the most. It's when I struggled with it. when I couldn't understand it. All of us in our hearts can cry out from time to time, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Because you see, for the capacity to doubt is one of our greatest powers. Hey, just look around you and see the beliefs and practices that, quite honestly, need to be doubted, should be doubted. And without the capacity to doubt, there could be no progress. There would only be this unquestioning acceptance of the status quo and of its established dogmatisms. So the question then becomes, is there a way back from our brush with doubt? Is there any way back from our feelings of doubt? I think there is. And let me give them to you very quickly. First, take the advice of Harry Emerson Fosdick, great preacher, great pastor, who once said that we are to doubt our doubts. Okay? To doubt our doubts. Now, I'm going to tell you, it takes some courage to do that. But you and I need to look our doubts straight in the eye and doubt them. And allow them not to control our minds, our thoughts, our actions. We need to take the advice, doubt your doubts. Secondly, we need to surround ourselves with a people of faith. Flawed and as imperfect as they may be, like dying embers brought close to the fire, if we are around a people of faith, we will be given an opportunity to catch that faith once again. I don't know how many people, and those of you who grill, you know what I'm talking about. Those of you who cook out, you know what I'm talking about. You get the charcoal all where you want it, and you get it lit. And invariably what happens is there's one or two pieces of charcoal that kind of falls off the pile, away from all the other coals. And as you look at it, you begin to notice, you know what? It's dying. It's going to go out. And so what do? You rake it back in toward the coals. And with the embers that still have fire to them, they can help reignite that coal in order that it might burn brightly once again. That's the thing we have to do. We have to surround ourselves with people of faith because they have the ability and the capacity in our closeness to encourage us, to listen to us, to oftentimes answer the questions we may have, to speak to our doubts that we too may have had, and how we dealt with them. So 3 things when we find ourselves beginning to doubt is doubt our doubts. Number 2, surround ourselves with a people of faith. And number 3 is to act as if. You say, what do you mean, act as if? Don't act as if not, but act as you believe. Because you see, you can simply act your way into a new way of feeling. You can act your way into a new mood. It's a struggle. It's a struggle. But here's the thing. You can act your way into a new way of feeling easier than you can feel your way into a new way of acting. And that's the point. The Christian faith will always face challenges. It's going to always face challenges from those who claim it will not stand up to scrutiny. But John says as much in the sentences right after the text we read today, the very last part. What did John tell us? Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. Okay? But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. Clearly, John knows that like Thomas, we're going to need evidence for our faith. And he provides it. In a culture that seems to vacillate back and forth between uncritically accepting and forwarding every email that comes along on the one hand, especially when it confirms our long-held beliefs, while at the very same time skeptically challenging that which seems almost impossible. We oftentimes find ourselves caught between blind faith and blind doubt. Perhaps it's time to let Thomas be our guide. To not be afraid to ask questions or seek evidence. Because here's the thing, God can handle it. God can handle it. To see with an open-eyed faith the confirmation of Jesus and the continuation of Jesus' life. That says that he is our Lord and our God. Here's the thing, folks. Today is the 8th day after the resurrection. And it is yet another good day to move from skepticism and doubt to faith and belief. What I would say to us this morning and to you is celebrate your doubt and see it as a prelude to a deep, abiding, and mature faith. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of it. Like Thomas, go after it. Go after it. Allow your skepticism, allow your doubt to lead you and to feed you as you seek to grow in your faith and in your understanding of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ.